Moinuddin Chishti was from Central Asia. He sort of grew up in his early childhood as sort of a refugee. His family was uprooted. There were armies ravaging the land, Arab armies, Persian armies, Turkic armies, even Chinese armies. And they always seemed to be moving in the wake of war. So that left an impression on him, as we'll see. At age 14, he was orphaned, but he ended up giving up everything that he inherited from his father, selling it, and going to pursue traditional Islamic studies in some of the great learning centers of Central Asia. And after a few years of doing this, though, he still felt empty, until he met a man named Usman Haruni. Usman Haruni happened to be a Sufi saint, at least a Sufi mystic, maybe not a saint yet, but a Sufi mystic of the Chishti order. And he followed Haruni all over the Muslim world, Persia, Arabia, Mesopotamia, even Egypt. And for many, many years, he was his apprentice. Haruni was his master. Well, eventually, obviously, Haruni died, and this was devastating to Moinuddin. But before he died, he had initiated Moinuddin into the Chishti order and basically made him his successor. Wondering what he should do next, and possibly at the instigation of the Prophet Muhammad himself, one tradition states that he'd had a vision of Muhammad while meditating at his grave in Medina, and had been told he needed to go to India. And so, whether from the instigation of Muhammad, or just because he was wandering around, or for some other reason, Moinuddin wandered into India. I should say that what we think we know about Moinuddin Chishti is based largely on hagiography. Okay? Traditions, stories that praise the man to no end. So who knows what's true, what's not. But according to tradition, Moinuddin had heard about the Hindus. He'd heard about their cosmic insights. Okay? He'd studied ancient Vedic texts at Nishapur, the great city of Nishapur that was unfortunately about to be obliterated by the Mongols, but that's a whole nother story. So he'd heard about India. And so he spent something like 5 years in Multan. So he's in India, but he's sort of on the fringe in Multan, studying Sanskrit, studying Vedic theology. And then after 40 days of meditation at the shrine of a Sufi saint in Lahore, he headed into the heartland. And where did he go? He went to the capital of the most powerful polity in India at the time, Ajmer, where ruled the young Prithviraj Chauhan. Moinuddin was entering India at a very tumultuous time. See, for many decades, Muslim-led armies had poured into India from the northwest, attracted obviously by a huge population, temples filled with idols, jewels, gold, lots of treasure. And of course, Mahmud of Ghazni, a century before, had shown how possible it was to make a real fortune. Tons and tons of treasure carried back to Central Asia by his raids on India. Something like 17 invasions of India during his lifetime. In fact, even at the moment that Moinuddin Chishti was entering India, Muhammad of Ghur was trying to do what Mahmud of Ghazni had done, before him. And he'd been pushed back by Prithviraj Chauhan before, multiple times actually. In fact, once Muhammad of Ghur had been captured and then released controversially by Prithviraj Chauhan according to the rules of the Rajput chivalric code. But Muhammad of Ghur, would he come back? The future was uncertain. This is the time when Moinuddin Chishti, a Muslim Sufi, approached the gates of Ajmer, the capital of the one polity that still stood directly between Muhammad of Ghur and all that treasure. He couldn't have come at a worse time, actually, because even as he's approaching the city, he may barely have reached the outskirts of Ajmer when Muhammad of Ghur's army also reached Ajmer. And as you may know, Muhammad of Ghur was victorious. He sacked the city, destroyed the polity. He went on to take Delhi. Then he took down a couple other North Indian kingdoms. And there was mass slaughter along the way, lots of devastation, and of course lots and lots of plundering. Thousands of camels made their way back, laden with plunder, with war booty, from Muhammad of Ghur's very successful expedition. And according to tradition, Moinuddin Chishti was so pained by this that he lost consciousness. See, he hated war, he abhorred war and violence, and he had hoped, according to tradition, to change the Ghurids' minds. He wanted Muhammad of Ghur to realize that what he was doing was very un-Islamic, according to Moinuddin Chishti and his interpretation. And so he'd hoped to change their minds and avoid this whole turn of events. but of course he was too late. So pained he lost consciousness, and he was nursed back to health over time by a Hindu woman, Bibi, a Rajput of wealthy background. Later, the two would actually get married to each other. A Rajput devotee of Vishnu and Moinuddin Chishti, a Sufi Muslim. Moinuddin Chishti and his wife Bibi could have lived very well due to her background, but he insisted they live modestly. And they did. They lived in a mud hut, basically. But their house was open to all, and they were known for their self-sacrifice. They were known for their charity. They were always giving. Moinuddin was known for his tolerance. He loved to find truth wherever he could. He did not feel that he had a monopoly on it. And he strictly lived his Islam as far as he interpreted it. But he welcomed Hindus. Hindus were entertained at his house very often, worshipped together with him. This was a time of rising devotional Hinduism. And so songs to Shiva, songs to Vishnu were recited in his house, and he loved it. He considered Vishnu, Shiva, these to be names of the same unified deity that he worshipped. And not only that, he incorporated yogic breathing exercises into his meditations. So he was very syncretistic in many ways. I mentioned his abhorrence of violence. So it makes sense that he would teach his disciples to keep their distance from political authority, to not get entangled in political things, and to never accept political money or money from rulers, gifts from the royal court, or anything like that. Moinuddin Chishti developed quite a following, quite a group of disciples, and before his death in 1236, they'd fanned out all over India, developing khanqahs and spreading the principles of the Chishti order and following his example. And this would become, the Chishti order would become the first of what are now the 4 major Sufi orders in India. It's a very tolerant, very syncretistic order. It really makes sense for India. And though Islam was spread in India in part by conquering armies, there's no question. Conquering Muslim armies, Muslim so-called, who wreaked havoc, really wreaked havoc. Perhaps just as much, perhaps more so, Islam was spread here by the work of people like Moinuddin, Sufi saints, Sufi missionaries, who in essence established places of service, places of charity, places of giving, and through example were able to win people over. Emperors and kings, princesses and queens would come to the mazar of Moinuddin Chishti here in Ajmer. In fact, the great Mughal Emperor Akbar, likewise very syncretistic, maybe there's no coincidence there, he would come here barefoot to pay his respect to the mazar of Moinuddin Chishti. And maybe it makes sense that in a place like India, a place filled with, ancient wisdom, ancient insights, all Indian philosophy with all its richness, not to mention huge multiplicity of peoples and cultures, maybe it makes sense that here a man like Moinuddin Chishti would find peace. See, men like Moinuddin Chishti present a particular challenge to particular people. Hindu nationalists, other Muslims at times, secularists. That's why there was some confusion when a bomb went off at Moinuddin Chishti's mazar in 2007, killing 3 and injuring almost 20 more. The fingers were immediately pointed across the border to Pakistan within the context of the Deobandi-Barelvi rivalry within Sunni Islam, perhaps the greatest, most important rivalry that you've likely never heard of, in my opinion. Again, that's another story. So other Muslims, more puritanical version of Islam, was blamed initially, but upon further investigation, the culprits were found to be Hindu nationalists, members of the RSS, although ironically, perhaps with ties to the Pakistani ISI, who knows, maybe. In any case, not puritanical Muslims, but Hindu nationalists. Why is it that someone like Moinuddin Chishti would present a challenge to Hindu nationalists? How about puritanical Muslims? How about secularists? Think about it.